Listen to me carefully. There are moments when God speaks so quietly that if you blink, you will miss it. And if you speak too soon, you will lose it. There are revelations so sacred that heaven does not announce them with thunder, but with a whisper that settles deep in your spirit. God said, keep this between you and me, not because it is small, but because it is so powerful that premature exposure would invite resistance before manifestation. Some things are not meant for the crowd. Some things are not meant for applause. Some things are entrusted to you alone because God knows your destiny cannot survive unnecessary voices. You have wondered why God has been stirring your heart in silence, why doors have been shifting without explanation, why you feel an urgency you cannot describe and a knowing you cannot fully articulate. This is not confusion. This is consecration. God is not hiding something from you. God is hiding you inside something. When God says, keep this between you and me, it is an invitation into divine partnership. It is a signal that you are being prepared for something that requires privacy before power. There are people who announce everything God whispers and they lose it before it is born. They mistake attention for affirmation and noise for progress. But God does not develop destinies in public. God develops them in secret places, in quiet obedience, in unseen faith. When God entrusts you with a private word, it is because that word is still fragile, still forming, still growing roots beneath the surface. What grows underground cannot be rushed by sunlight. What is planted must first be protected. You must understand this. Not everyone around you is assigned to your future. Some are only assigned to your season of preparation. God knows who can handle the weight of what is coming and who would mishandle it through doubt, jealousy, or fear. That is why God sometimes isolates you emotionally, even while you are surrounded physically. That is why conversations feel shallow, why familiar spaces feel tight, why your spirit no longer finds rest in what once satisfied you. God is narrowing your focus because distraction is the enemy of destiny. When God said, keep this between you and me, it was not secrecy rooted in fear. It was secrecy rooted in strategy. God does not expose plans before their time. God reveals instructions, not outcomes. You are not required to explain what God has not yet completed. Faith does not need validation. Obedience does not need an audience. The greatest moves of God often begin with a single individual who learns to be quiet enough to hear and strong enough to wait. There are things God will show you that you are not allowed to post, not allowed to announce, not allowed to defend. You will feel the pressure to prove yourself, to explain yourself, to justify the delay. But God is saying, remain still. Silence is not weakness. Silence is discipline. Silence is alignment. When you speak too early, you force God's hand into a timeline He did not choose. When you wait, you allow God to move with precision. Some of you are carrying a promise that feels too big for your current environment. That is intentional. God always places a vision inside you that your surroundings cannot support, so you are forced to rely on God alone. If the people around you could help you accomplish it, you would never learn to trust God fully. That is why God removes supports, reduces options, and closes familiar doors, not to punish you, but to position you. You are not being delayed. You are being hidden from sabotage, hidden from distraction, hidden from voices that would question what God has already confirmed in your spirit. God knows that not everyone celebrates growth. Some people feel threatened by it. That is why God tells you, keep this between you and me. What God is about to do through you will challenge systems, disrupt expectations, and expose limitations in others. Not everyone will be ready for it. There is a sacred process happening in your life right now. God is training your discernment, sharpening your hearing, strengthening your patience. You are learning when to speak and when to remain silent. You are learning that not every question deserves an answer and not every opportunity deserves your yes. God is teaching you restraint, because power without restraint becomes destructive. Influence without wisdom becomes dangerous. Do not be troubled by the loneliness of this season. Solitude is not abandonment. Solitude is refinement. God often separates before God elevates. You cannot carry new authority with old dependencies. You cannot walk into what is next while dragging what is familiar. That is why God pulls you aside and speaks privately. This is not exclusion. This is preparation. You may feel misunderstood right now, but misunderstanding is often a sign that you are growing beyond your previous language. You cannot explain what God has not yet revealed publicly. When the time comes, explanation will no longer be necessary because evidence will speak louder than words. Until then, obedience is your responsibility, not explanation. God is watching how you steward the secret. Will you protect it or parade it? Will you nurture it or negotiate it? Will you trust God enough to stay silent when everything in you wants to speak? This is a test of maturity. This is a test of faith. God does not. Give public victories to those who cannot handle private instructions. Some blessings are delayed because they are spoken about too early. Some breakthroughs are resisted because they are shared with the wrong people. God is not trying to make you mysterious. God is trying to make you effective. When God moves, it will not need your promotion. It will carry its own authority. You are entering a season where discernment matters more than excitement. Not every open door is from God, and not every closed door is rejection. Sometimes God closes doors to protect what is forming inside you. Sometimes God delays answers to deepen your trust. Sometimes God keeps things private because your faith is still learning how to stand without applause. The reason this feels heavy is because it is holy. The reason it feels intense is because it is intentional. God is not confusing you. God is consecrating you. You are being taught to move when God says move and to wait when God says wait, even when waiting feels uncomfortable and silence feels risky. Remember this: what God has whispered will eventually be proclaimed, but only after it has passed the test of obedience. What begins in secrecy will end in significance. What is formed in silence will move nations. What God is doing in you right now is larger than your current understanding. And that is why God has said, keep this between you and me, because the weight of it requires time, alignment, and unwavering faith. And the moment you begin to doubt, explain, or seek permission from people who were never assigned to your destiny, you risk weakening what God is strengthening. So stay still, stay faithful, stay obedient, and guard what God has placed in your spirit, because this private word is not just information, it is instruction, it is transformation, it is preparation for a shift that will alter the direction of your life in WA. You cannot yet explain, only obey, and as long as you remain faithful in the silence, God will remain faithful in the outcome, because what God has begun in secret will unfold with such clarity and authority that no one will be able to deny that it was God who spoke, God who guided, God who sustained, God who opened the way, and God who fulfilled every word spoken quietly in the place where only you and God stood together, listening, trusting, and moving forward, even when the path was not yet visible, even when the confirmation had not yet arrived, even when the only assurance you had was the deep knowing in your spirit that God had spoken, and that was enough to keep walking, enough to keep believing, enough to keep waiting, enough to keep guarding the word that was never meant to be shared, until the appointed time when God would say, now you may speak, now you may move, now you may reveal, now you may step forward, because what was kept between you and me has grown strong enough to stand in the open without being shaken by doubt, opposition, or fear, And the very thing that required silence will one day demand attention, not because you announced it, but because God revealed it in power, in timing, and in a way that could never have been achieved through human effort alone. And until that moment arrives, you must remain steady, grounded, and faithful, knowing that God's silence is not absence. God's delay is not denial, and God's private instruction is the greatest evidence that you are being prepared for something that will require a level of strength, wisdom, and spiritual authority that can only be developed when you learn to walk with God alone, trusting every step, honoring every instruction, and holding close the sacred words that were never meant for the crowd but were entrusted to you because God saw something in you that required this level of trust. This is level of discipline, this level of faith, and this level of obedience as you continue to move forward, carrying a promise that is still unfolding, still forming, still growing in the unseen, knowing that what is hidden now is only hidden because it is being protected, refined, and strengthened for the moment when God decides it is time for the secret to become substance and the whisper to become reality, as you stand ready, aligned, and willing to follow God wherever the next step leads, even if that step requires more silence, more trust, more patience, and more faith than you have ever had to exercise before, because God knows exactly why this had to remain between you and me, and why the journey cannot be rushed, and why the process cannot be shared, and why the reward will be worth every moment of waiting as you continue to walk forward carrying a sacred instruction that is still unfolding in the presence of God, still protected by God, still guided by God, still moving toward a fulfillment that will arrive not by your announcement, but by God's perfect timing and divine authority as the work continues within you and around you and ahead of you, where God is already preparing what you cannot yet see, but are being trained to trust without needing to explain, without needing to prove, without needing to speak before the time, because the silence itself is shaping you into the kind of person who can carry what is coming without breaking under its weight and without losing sight of the one who spoke it into existence and asked you just for now to keep this between you and me. There is a deeper reason God speaks privately before God acts publicly, and it has nothing to do with hiding you from people and everything to do with anchoring you in truth. God knows that when something is announced before it is anchored, it becomes vulnerable to pressure to perform, sure to rush, pressure to shape it according to human approval instead of divine instruction. God does not want you responding to expectations that were never assigned to you. God wants you responding to direction. That is why the instruction came quietly. That is why the confirmation came inwardly. That is why the clarity did not come with noise, but with certainty. You must understand that faith matures in silence. Faith grows when there is no applause, no agreement, no visible evidence, only trust. God is training you to walk without leaning on reassurance from others. If God allowed everyone to know what was coming too early, you would unconsciously begin to carry their opinions alongside God's instruction. And divided focus weakens divine alignment. God wants your obedience undiluted. There are people who mistake secrecy for fear, but what God is teaching you is restraint. Restraint is the language of power. Anyone can speak when they feel something, but it takes spiritual authority to remain silent when you know something. When God entrusts you with a private word, it is because that word carries consequences. It will shift environments. It will challenge systems. It will expose motives. And until you are strong enough to stand without reacting, God keeps the details guarded. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything. You are exactly where God needs you to be, so that what is forming inside you can grow without interference. Do not rush what God is refining. Impatience has ruined more destinies than failure ever did. God is never in a hurry because God sees the full picture, not just the current moment that feels heavy to you. Some of you have been questioning your own discernment because the instruction you receive does not align with what others expect from you. That is a sign that God is redirecting you. When God changes your direction, God rarely explains it to your circle. God explains it to your spirit. If you wait for everyone to understand before you move, you will remain stuck in places God already released you from. God is not obligated to explain God's plan to people who are not assigned to help carry it. You do not need permission to obey God. You do not need consensus to follow divine instruction. What you need is courage. The courage to trust what God has spoken, even when it isolates you, even when it costs you familiarity, even when it requires you to step away from what feels safe. There is a weight to this season because God is increasing your capacity. Capacity is built through pressure, not comfort. God is stretching your ability to hold responsibility, influence, and authority without losing humility. That is why God is teaching you to be content in the unseen. If you cannot remain faithful when no one knows, you will struggle when everyone is watching. Do not underestimate the power of waiting. Waiting is not inactivity. Waiting is obedience in stillness. While you wait, God is aligning circumstances you cannot see. God is positioning people you have not met. God is rearranging outcomes that will make sense only later. You are not idle. You are being synchronized with timing that is larger than your perspective. Some instructions feel incomplete because God reveals in stages. God does not overwhelm you with the full picture because full clarity too early would tempt you to rely on strategy instead of trust. God wants relationship, not just results. God wants dependence, not just execution. That is why each step is revealed only after the previous one is obeyed. You may feel the urge to defend your silence, but silence does not need defense. Silence needs faith. When the time comes, the results will speak for you. Until then, let people misunderstand. Let them speculate. Let them assume. Their assumptions cannot cancel what God has already confirmed. God is teaching you discernment through distance. Distance from noise, distance from comparison, distance from unnecessary explanations. When God separates you, it is not because you are better. It is because the assignment is different. Different assignments require different preparation. Different levels require different disciplines. There will come a moment when God will say, "Now speak." And when that moment arrives, you will not have to force doors open. You will not have to convince anyone. You will not have to rehearse explanations. The authority will already be present because it was forged in obedience, patience, and restraint. Until that moment, guard your spirit. Guard your peace. Guard the instruction. Not everyone deserves access to what God is developing. Not everyone will handle it with reverence. Some people will try to reduce it to their level of understanding, and God did not give it to you to be reduced. God gave it to you to be fulfilled. You are learning that faith is not loud. Faith is steady. Faith does not panic when progress is invisible. Faith does not retreat when clarity is delayed. Faith rests in the character of God, even when outcomes are not yet visible. God is not silent because God is distant. God is quiet because God is close. When someone is far away, they shout. When someone is near, they whisper. The whisper means intimacy. The whisper means trust. The whisper means you are being invited into a deeper level of relationship where guidance is not shouted over chaos but communicated within stillness. What God is doing in you right now is building inner stability. Soon, external changes will require internal strength. Without that strength, success would become a burden instead of a blessing. God prepares the vessel before God pours the oil. Remain faithful in the unseen. Remain disciplined in your thoughts. Remain obedient in your actions. Every quiet decision you make now is shaping the authority you will carry later. Every moment you choose trust over explanation strengthens your spiritual foundation. The instruction to keep this between you and God is not permanent, it is seasonal. But while this season lasts, honor it. Do not rush God. Do not negotiate with impatience. Do not confuse silence with stagnation. What is happening beneath the surface is more important than what could be announced above it. God sees your restraint. God honors your obedience. God is shaping you for a moment that will require clarity, courage, and unshakable faith. When that moment comes, you will look back and understand why silence was necessary, why waiting was required, why not everyone could be told, and why the journey had to unfold exactly as it did, step by step, moment by moment, in quiet partnership with God, who never wastes seasons, never delays without purpose, never speaks without intention, and never entrusts a secret to someone who is not capable of carrying it all the way to fulfillment. As you continue forward, grounded, prepared, aligned, and ready for what God has already set in motion beyond what your eyes can see, but your spirit already knows is coming. Now is the moment to pause and look inward, not with fear, but with honesty. Ask yourself whether you have been honoring what God whispered to you, or whether you have been trying to drown it out with noise, distraction, or delay. This is a sacred invitation to realign your life, not around comfort, not around approval, but around obedience. God is not asking for perfection, only for surrender. Not for performance, only for trust. What God placed in your spirit was not accidental, and it was not temporary. It was given because you were strong enough to carry it, even when it demanded silence, patience, and courage. Let this be the moment you stop negotiating with doubt and start agreeing with God. Lay down the need to be understood. Lay down the urge to explain yourself. Lay down the habit of measuring your progress by visible results. Return to the quiet place where God speaks clearly, where purpose is renewed, where fear loses its grip, and where faith stands firm, even when the path ahead is not fully visible. God is calling you back to alignment, back to discipline, back to trust. Examine your life and ask whether your daily choices reflect the weight of the instruction you were given. Are you guarding your thoughts, your time, your spirit, or have you allowed distractions to dilute your focus? This is not condemnation, this is awakening. God corrects because God cares. God challenges because God believes in what God has placed inside you. Do not shrink back now. Do not retreat into comfort when you were called to grow. Choose today to walk closer to God, not just in words, but in posture. Let your actions reflect reverence. Let your silence reflect wisdom. Let your patience reflect faith. You do not need to see the entire journey to take the next step. You only need to trust the one who gave the instruction. Every step taken in obedience strengthens your spirit and sharpens your discernment. Remember that what God has entrusted to you is alive. It grows when you protect it. It strengthens when you honor it. It moves closer to fulfillment every time you choose faith over fear and obedience over impulse. You are not walking alone. God is with you in the silence, with you in the waiting, with you in every unseen moment where character is being formed and purpose is being clarified. Let this be the turning point where you recommit your life fully to God, where you stop hesitating and start trusting, where you stop questioning your worth and start honoring the calling placed within you. Carry the secret with integrity, walk with humility, stand with courage, and live with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that God has spoken, God is guiding, and God will fulfill every word in perfect timing, with divine authority and with a power that will leave no doubt that it was God alone who led you, sustained you, and brought you into the fullness of what was once whispered and faithfully guarded between you and God.